So my colleague Aymara and I are going to start you off with something that I think should bring everyone to ease, which is what Elada said previously. We are not advocating for you to burn your textbook outside of your school and claim that you're now only going to use authentic material. We want to talk to you about how to bring authentic data into your classroom and enhance what you already use. Because most of us are pretty much comfortable with our textbooks and we've been working with them for a couple of years. So how can you take your textbook, take some of the ideas that we're presenting about authentic material and sort of marry the two and just enhance your classroom? So I will start off with an example from first year, and then my colleague Aymara will give you an example for second year. So this is going to be the basic outline. I'm going to once again sort of echo what Elada presented as far as what is our definition of authentic material. And then I'll show you a first year sample, and she will show you a second year Spanish sample. So we obviously have probably complained with colleagues or thought to ourselves that there's some limitations that are presented in the textbooks that we use. Most of the audio in our textbooks is scripted, and they speak really slowly, and they have no accent, and everything's beautiful. There's no background noise, right? So it's like there's two people in a cafe, and there's silence, right? I've never been at that cafe where there's silence, right? So we have these pristine, very much manipulated audios that are scripted and don't ever, they aren't very close to what we actually see in real life. And they're very much extremely modified. What do we mean by the word authentic, and are you already using some? When I first heard of the idea of using authentic material, I thought to myself, well, I'm already doing that. And I had my collection of menus from different restaurants and newspaper articles, etc. And what we were being pushed to think about is to go beyond those traditional authentic materials that we think that we already have incorporated. Because for the most part, when we say, I'm already using authentic materials, we're referring to written materials, right? That we can make photocopies from, or when we travel abroad, we bring back menus and flyers and so forth, which is great. But now we need to add to that arsenal of authentic materials, spoken authentic materials, right? Because if you think about it, if our goal is to have our students be able to interact in the target language community, how much of that is going to be written and how much of that is actually going to be spoken? Yes? So this is my story, and this is how all of this sort of took place. So the command conjugated in the us form is something that is taught in all Spanish textbooks. It actually has its own chapter. That's how important it is, its own section and a chapter. But they wait, for the most part, I took out the name of the textbook, you might recognize it. They wait until chapter 14, which means second semester Spanish, which means my students potentially cannot give instructions or commands when they're part of a group until like 20 weeks into their Spanish studies. So then I thought to myself, one, why am I waiting so long to have my students learn this skill? And two, do Spanish speakers actually use the very specific subjunctive conjugation of the command for us, right? Because obviously different skills have different ways to be done, right? And so this is a very specific way to give commands for a group that includes ourselves. I asked myself, well, do native speakers, Spanish native speakers, is this the structure that we actually use when we are part of a group and we're going to give a command? So then I went to Google and I started to research, and I was actually very pleased to find a study that looked at a corpus and that counted the different ways that native speakers command a group that includes themselves. And as you can see from the numbers, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 7 different ways to do so. And of the 7 different ways, you can see the numbers are distributed in a bunch of other different forms that include the conjugation for us, but also include things that my students know from the second week of Spanish. And as a matter of fact, some of the more used ones are not, the one with the highest number was not the traditional conjugation of us in the subjunctive in Spanish. It was something that was much easier, that my students could do earlier. So then I looked at my textbook, and this is the example. They have this conversation that is forcing poor Sergio and Maria for some reason, to force them to use this very specific conjugation of the command for us, right? And they're forcing these poor characters to do so because that's the goal of the section of the chapter, right? We have to force Sergio and Maria to use the subjunctive conjugation of us. So then I thought, well, this conversation sounds very weird because this is not how I think these guys are making arrangements for the afternoon. Just thinking in terms of how I make arrangements with colleagues in the afternoon, the us command just sounds weird. It just sounds forced. So then I said, well, there's no context either. So the sole purpose of this conversation, of this section of the chapter, is to force feed the conjugation of us and the subjunctive in Spanish to make it fit this very particular goal. Where I have a different goal, I want my students to be able to give instructions for a group that includes themselves using whatever tool is the one that everyone else uses. Because if not, my poor kid is going to be in Argentina sounding like a weird Sergio or Maria, right? And people are going to look at them like, why are you trying really hard to use this very specific conjugation, right? So I knew I had to do something. And more so because I found this piece of research that indicated that Spanish speakers use a bunch of other tools to give instructions for a group in which they are included, yes? And tools that are much easier for our students to learn. So then I had to think, okay, well, when do we actually give instructions? Do we give instructions? In what context do we give instructions? And so then I started into the wormhole that is YouTube and started looking for different places. And so usually instructions are given in these different contexts when you're cooking. I found one on braiding, some of these young girls that have blogs where they give beauty tips and so forth. And so she was showing how to braid. I thought about morning shows. In Mexico, I found a morning show where they invited a Pilates instructor and she's given instructions. And in these three contexts, the commands were given for a group that included the person in the group. So I went in and I finally chose the cooking one. It's a girl who's in Mexico who does a blog to teach people how to make Mexican dishes, and she's teaching folks how to make flautas. So I didn't get a student. I transcribed the entire video. It was a short segment of it. I transcribed it and then I enhanced it, which is what Elade was referring to. You take the transcription and you enhance it. In this case, my students wouldn't get it like this. My students would get the verbs in bold. They would get that as a blank for them to work with. I also did the transcription for the braiding situation and for Pilates. So these are the steps. So in order just to get them thinking about what we're about to do, I just have them find a partner, think about their favorite dish, and instruct their partner on how to make that dish quickly, 2 to 3 minutes, just to get them activated. I don't need them to write down anything. I don't need them to think about any sort of special conjugation, just how would they give instructions on how to make a dish, because that's the focus of the lesson. I give them the transcript with the blanks, and I give them the context. I say, this is a young lady. She has a blog on YouTube. She's teaching folks how to make flautas. Here are the blanks for the verbs that give instructions. What do you think she uses? So I'm asking them to make hypotheses about what they think a native speaker is going to do. And so what's interesting is a lot of the students have varying answers to what they think the native speaker is going to do in the video. They obviously, I make the class dynamic in the sense that they fill it in by themselves and they compare with a partner, then they compare in a larger group, and they all sort of speculate about what does everyone think is going to be on the actual audio. Then I ask them in a different color pen or in a different place when they listen to the audio to write down what they actually heard the native speaker do, because I need them to be able to compare and contrast what they thought the native speaker was going to do versus what the actual native speaker did. And so then they compare and contrast and they identify patterns. And you really can't see it there, but I ask them to name which are the verb tenses that they use, and then name the actual verb tense that was used by the native speaker, and to compare and contrast. Now you can have a more in-depth conversation if this is a more advanced course. For a first-year language course, I'm just happy that they can notice that it's something different, right? And that maybe they used the traditional conjugation for us command, and the native speaker, in this case, used the present tense, ir más infinitive. So I will end by saying that I was able to use these transcripts and modify the tasks that I asked my students to do for different levels. So while it takes a lot of time to find the video and to transcribe it, the way I save time is by then reconfiguring that transcript and using it for another task for another level. Yes, they complain, I don't understand everything that she's saying, but I don't need them to understand everything that she's saying. That's for another class. I need them to focus in on the one thing that we're talking about, which is how to command for a group that includes yourself. The other transcripts that I had for braiding and for Pilates, I used one for homework. So they need to do the same thing that we did in class. They mirror it again in homework. And then the third transcription, I use it for the actual test. So then we recycle the process over and over again. So then what happens is that students now, whenever they're listening to things, they listen with a different ear. They're like Ella was saying, they're little analysts. They're like, oh, profe, I noticed now when people do this and do that. And the last thing I will say is that I asked family members to send me screenshots of their WhatsApp text messages when they're organizing a party, because I thought that's whenever we use commands for us, and nobody was using the traditional us. I can't find, other than the textbook world, I can't find anywhere in real life where people will go to that very specific conjugation. And so screenshots of text messages and WhatsApp messages with context where you know instructions for a group that includes yourself are given were also useful to sort of compare. So yeah, if you know of anywhere where people force themselves to use the subjunctive conjugation for us, let me know, because I'm having a hard time finding that. So I will let my colleague Aymara give you the example for second year Spanish.
Thank you. Okay, so this is my story with the intermediate level. Let's see. Okay, so I had taught first a class in Spanish business, and it was an advanced level class, and I had a lesson on inflation. And then I went to teach the intermediate level, and I found that my textbook had a chapter on how to earn a living. And there was a lot of vocabulary that I remember we were using also in the advanced level about salary, money, banks, transactions, and all of these things. And I said, I have a lesson that I created for my advanced level that has all of this vocabulary. So let me see how I can bring this lesson down to the intermediate level to see if we can use this vocabulary that they have to learn anyway because it's in the textbook, but in a different way. Something that will help them be able to speak about a topic that is not necessarily addressed in the textbook, but it can be addressed maybe in another class they're taking, if they're taking economics, or anything in another context besides our classroom. So I started looking for the different types of authentic materials that I could find that would help me teach the students how to look at a text where they explain how to calculate inflation, and a lot of my vocabulary that was part of the lesson would be in it. So this is what I did with the materials that I found. First of all, I decided that my main source of materials was a WikiHow website that I found that had lots of graphics and very short instructions on how to calculate inflations, and it was done in 3 steps, and it had two images, and one is that. I have a lot of students who are pre-med, engineering, and social sciences. So all of this went into that. They like to bring whatever is their interest into the classroom. So that is one of the images. So I decided what activities can I do with the source that I found. And I could do a reading comprehension. The instructions were there so they could prepare some readings, classify the words, so find the vocabulary words that we have learned for this lesson and classify them. Is this a verb? Is this a noun? What is this? And these two are things that they can do outside of class before coming and preparing for the lesson. Or you can also do it in class. The third one was using the vocabulary in a fact-finding. This is a traditional activity where you give them questions and you tell them to go out to the classroom and ask a student, have you done this? Using the vocabulary, sign here. And they collect the signatures for how many people have done this and that. That's another activity. The other one is using the content. So actually using and practicing with the directions that were given in the text to actually calculate inflation in the US. So I gave them some numbers and I said, let's follow the instructions as it says there and calculate. This part, they were very excited. They were all grabbing for their calculators because they're all in science, and they were following the formula. I have to tell you that even though I started in economics, I had forgotten a lot of it, so I had to sit down and calculate with my calculator and also ask my husband, is this right? Because I needed to have the answers afterwards. But for them, it was really easy. It started like a competition. So I gave them the data, and they started doing and they were like, what did you get? And what did you get? No, yes, mine is right. So they started... Okay, wait, that's not what we're learning here. We're learning about the language. But it got them excited about the material. And then the last part is the conclusion of these 3 instructions, where they talk about what is the effect of inflation in your salary. So we did a dictogloss on that activity. The other authentic material that I found was a video that has a dialogue, and it's a very long video. It's about close to between 7 and 10 minutes. It's very long, that explains this convoluted process on how to calculate inflation and what it is. But this video starts with a conversation of this man going around. He's from Colombia, and he's asking people on the street, do you know what inflation is? And then he asks 3 or 4 people, and then he goes, do you know how to calculate it? And then it took me a while to see what the answers of these people were. Obviously, they were all saying no, but none of them were using the negation formula that we have taught the students on how to say no. They were using all kinds of things except what was in my textbook. So I said, I can use this, and it was about 1.5 minutes of the whole 10-minute video. So I took this part, and I had it cut, just that part, and I did the transcription. And I said, okay, so let's look at how people say no, and all of the different ways that they do. And I had the students follow what we've been talking about before. They looked at the transcription. I had them fill in the blanks with how would you answer this question. Actually, before we did that, I told them to just talk to their friend and ask them the question that was going to be asked on the video. I didn't tell them what was going to be asked. I just said, okay, go to your friend and ask them, do you know what's inflation? Do you know how to calculate it? To see how they would answer. And then they went to the transcription, they fill in the blanks, and then we went to the video to see what people actually say. And okay, let's analyze what we said and what they said. Again, comparing what they have learned to what actually happens in real life. And so my grammar part was use of negatives in a different way. The activities that I designed with this little piece of 1 minute was activating previous knowledge, having a conversation with your friend, asking the questions in the video, a listening comprehension with enhanced input, that is changing what I need them to focus in, which is the ways to negate. And then negating using the transcription to compare and infer the new uses of the concept, how to negate. And then they had a mini conversation where I gave them 3 situations. And this is a dynamic activity where you give them 3 situations, and the students are going to ask to talk about the topic, then you change the topic. You have 2 students speaking, and 1 student is the observer. The observer is there to check or to mark how many times, for example, their two friends use a vocabulary word, or use a negation, or use something that has been part of the lesson. And then the second situation, they change roles. So the observer becomes the speaker, and then the other two are speaking. And these are very quick conversations, 1 to 3 minutes each round. And then they give the feedback to their colleagues at this, right away, and tell them, okay, you did use what we learned, or you didn't use, or you could have used it here, but you didn't, that kind of thing. So that's what I did with my materials. I had other materials that I could not use in the classroom, but I didn't want to put them away because I thought they were interesting too. And so what I did is, with the other sources, I classify them as other. These are other things that I can, that they can use. And what I did is I found a website that they can see how much, they can calculate how much the hamburger is going to cost from one year to another. What they do is they build their hamburger and they check, I want cheese, I want lettuce, I want tomato, and they give them the prices, and then they calculate how the price of the hamburger has changed over the years. At the same time, I found another one that does the same thing with the Venezuelan arepa. And the arepa is a staple food of Venezuela. So already they have some culture in there, and they also have, they can see this, this is a BBC Mundo piece of news, and the reporter actually calculates how the price of the arepa has changed, which is explosive because, as some of you may know, in Venezuela, the inflation rate is in the 200s, 260s, and even 300s. So they see the change in the price, and they see the change in the price of their hamburger, and they can start doing some inferences about what people in Venezuela are going through and that kind of thing. So that's an activity that I left for them to do at home, and then they could report back to the class, or they can write a short paragraph about what was it, what happened, and what they think, use the vocabulary that we learned. The other one was a short article and a map, and I don't have the picture here, but it was a map that had all the countries in Latin America and the rate of inflation of each one, and I said, okay, let's take that, read the article, what are the two countries that have the highest rate of inflation, very short article, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 lines, and then they could write about a comparison between the rate of inflation in these countries and in the US. And the final one, I found all these Google images that try to explain what the consequences of inflation to a household. So the prices go up, and then my salary, real salary, starts going down, and I can't reach to what I need to buy anymore, so they can relate to what's happening. So the activity was, look at these images. I had maybe 3, and I said, what is inflation? Draw a picture and write a short paragraph to explain your picture. And that was something they did for homework. So these are all 3 things that I thought that they were interesting, but they weren't. They wouldn't serve my purpose in the classroom, but they could be used for homework. Okay, so what did we do in these 2 lessons? Vocabulary and grammar. The new vocabulary was seen as used by native speakers in products that were designed for native speakers, and they could manipulate and use them and understand them. Grammar concepts were presented using real-world examples on the video that I found. They see grammar used in new ways and new context that goes beyond what they had learned in the textbook. And in terms of language analysis and expanded use of the target language, they use the target language in comparison to their own. So this is how I say it, and this is how the native speakers do say it, and they make inferences about the uses. And it helps them transition from the classroom to the real world, so that the Spanish that they are learning in the classroom has now a relation to the real world, where native speakers do use this type of material, and how do they use it, and how I can be a part of it. Thank you.